Welcome everyone. In this video, I'm going to show you how I made this live edge wood slab bench out of black walnut, which is one of my favorite woods to work with. So stay tuned. So I bought this piece offline off a vendor, and this is how it was delivered. You can see it's 24 inches wide at the widest, 19 at the narrowest, and about 40 inches long overall. It was planed on both sides already, and it was actually pretty smooth coming out of the box, so didn't have to do a whole lot to get it prepped and ready. Now the first step to working on any type of project like this with live edge is you want to take an angle grinder or a restorer or something like that to just clear off the edges, get all the bark, get all the loose stuff off, and make sure you have nice solid wood to work with. There's not much to this, just take your time and go slow, apply nice even pressure. You don't want to press too hard, otherwise the angle grinder will gouge out wood. Let the tool do the work. Now I'm just doing a light sanding, using 120 to go over both sides. I'm going to end up doing some epoxy in a little bit, so I don't want to go too high with grits, knowing I'm going to have to re-sand it down anyway. Here I'm just flipping it over. This is going to be the top once it's complete. I lay out some pencil marks, that way I make sure I sand nice and evenly and don't miss any spots. At this point, it's time to square it up and get it cut to its final dimensions. Grab your best measuring equipment and let's get started. Now I'm just lining up my circular saw, trying to get the best look here and try to keep as much wood as possible. It's about 5 inches from the outside edge of the guide rail for the circular saw to the cutting edge, and I'm just accommodating for all of that. Once you get your final cuts made and your final dimensions, now it's time to fix any imperfections with epoxy. I'm going to end up filling these two large cracks you see right here with epoxy tinted black. Just a disclaimer, I'm not affiliated with any of these products, so these are just my personal experiences. Flip it over, take your Tyvek tape or whatever you plan to use here. I use Tyvek tape just because it's generally the best, and just apply it to all the cracks. So that way when you go to pour, it doesn't leak out the bottom. If your crack runs into the end, don't forget to tape the end too, otherwise it will just pour out everywhere. Alright, time to mix up some epoxy. This Total Boat stuff is pretty easy, it's 1-to-1. Just stir it and mix it very thoroughly for about 3 minutes. Pour it into a new cup, mix it again for 3 minutes. Really take your time mixing here, make sure to be very thorough, scrape the sides, you want to get every last bit mixed as much as possible. Oh, and don't be a bonehead like me and mix this stuff on your finished piece. Grab a sacrificial piece of plywood or some scrap and then mix it on that. Take your time pouring here, you want to try to avoid making a huge mess. It's going to be inevitable, but anytime you can save later on cleaning up is a win. As you can see, it's taken me a couple different passes to really fill this up. These cracks are a lot bigger than you realize when you go to pour this stuff in. On to crack number 2. Just same principles, pour slowly, work it into the crack, and then finish it up. As with any epoxy, you're always going to have air bubbles, even with black. Just because you can't see them doesn't mean they're not there. So just take a heat gun or a torch, go about 6 inches away and just make some fast, smooth passes and they'll pop. Alright, now again, because this is fast setting epoxy, this is about 12 hours later. And there you can see the mistake. I missed the part with the tape and I did have a leak on the bottom. Not anything catastrophic, but still annoying that I'd have to go back and fix. But anyway, yeah, about 12 hours later, you're good to go. Just check, make sure it's not tacky anymore. You're not leaving any fingerprints. If it's hard to touch, then it's good to go. If you are using a sander, just take your time, nice even pressure, use good sanding techniques, and you'll get the epoxy down eventually. I know this looks harsh, looks like I'm really gouging the wood out, but I assure you I'm not. I'm staying on top of the epoxy, and I'm checking the wood around it every chance I get. Once that's out of the way, the epoxy's done, your sanding's all done, you're satisfied with it, it's time to move on to the finish sanding. Now, with something like this, something beautiful like a black walnut slab, you really want to step through all of the grits. I start at 80, I work all the way up to 400 minimum. Sometimes I even go up to 600 depending on the project. If you're new to sanding, you're new to woodworking, some techniques here to help you. Nice firm even pressure, and just go across the grain, back and forth, multiple passes, overlapping each disc, and then alternate in the other direction. I usually start left to right, and then I go top to bottom. And don't forget about the end grain and the sides too. A lot of people tend to overlook those. I also go over the edge, I break the edges, and just give it a nice rounded over. If you have a router, you can use a round over bit, which I do sometimes if it's a larger project. Something this small, I'm confident I can do it with just the sander. Here I'm using the light from my phone to check for any swirl marks or pigtails left over to see if I have to go back and redo any grits. Another neat trick I learned watching people online is use some mineral spirits to wipe it down before your final grit. A, it's going to clear off any dust, and B, you'll be able to really see any final swirl marks or pigtails that left behind. And unlike water, it's not going to raise the grain of the wood, and it dries very fast. This is only about 2 minutes later, and I'm able to go right into my final level of sanding. Alright, time to lay out the legs. Flip it over into something soft like a piece of cardboard or a blanket, so you don't scratch that top you just sanded, and just position your legs. These were supplied by the customer. They like the hairpin style, but you can use any legs you really like, as long as they fit obviously. So at this point, I'm just positioning them about an inch off the edges all the way around, and then I'm going to square them up to each other. And take your time doing this, you only get one shot at it. The good thing about these brackets are the holes are slotted, so they do give you some play in case you don't get drilled holes right on center. Not really sure what happened to the camera here. Looks like it went out of focus at some point during the shooting of this, so I apologize. Once you get the layout perfected, Just go ahead and take a pencil or a marking tool and mark the holes so you can go ahead and pre-drill. Pre-drilling can be risky if you're not paying attention or you lose focus. Just take your time, don't go too deep. You don't need to drill all the way through, obviously. Just enough for the fasteners that you're using, so that way you don't crack the hardwood when you go to secure them. And here, I'm just making any final adjustments, moving those brackets around to get them perfectly square and centered exactly where I want them. Once the legs are installed, let's get it into position so we can do the finish. One last check with the flashlight to make sure I didn't miss any scuffs or scratches or swirl marks. For the finish, I like to use Odies Oil for these types of projects. It's a really good finish, very durable, and it's really super easy to apply. It smells great, and it's just all around easy to work with. Now you don't have to use Odies Oil. I'm not sponsored by them by any means, but you can use anything you want. Rubio Monocoat or Osmo is pretty popular too. Or you could even just go with polyurethane or shellac if you really wanted. Either way, you're going to want to use just a natural finish to bring out that wood grain. If you are going to use Odies Oil, here are some tips that I've learned from using it. You don't need a whole lot, it goes a very long way, trust me. Just get a decent amount on a lint-free rag and just buff it on. You want to go with the grain, also go circular motions, and just get it nice and saturated. Once the first coat is on, come back to it after about 30 minutes. If you notice any dry spots, just touch it up with a bit more oil and buff it on like before. After the second coat, if you applied one, you want to come back and just make sure it's still saturated and wet to touch. This camera shot is showing you after the second coat in about 40 minutes. So just run a finger over it. If your finger comes up dry, then you need to apply a bit more. Once you're satisfied with the finish, now it's time to buff off the excess. According to the instructions, it says to wait at least 40 minutes, but no longer than 20 hours. And there you have it. We went from this raw piece of black walnut to this. If you liked what you saw, I'd appreciate a thumbs up and a subscribe. If you didn't like what you saw, comment in the section, let me know. I'm always trying to get better. Anyways, take care and thanks again for watching.